Welcome back. Fake news became a popular term during the presidential campaign to describe false, fictitious, phony stories about Hillary Clinton planted in news feeds and social media by the Russians. President Trump has since co-opted the term to describe critical stories about him and his administration. After CNN broke the story that U.S. intelligence services briefed President-elect Trump about reports that the Russians have compromising information about him, Trump refused to take questions from the network, calling CNN fake news. Trump has continued what he calls a running war with the press. News organizations have continued to point out factually false statements by the president, with the president regularly responding in 140 characters, sometimes calling those stories fake news. Joining us for more on fake news and the relationship between President Trump and the media are Andrea Mogensen, an attorney who deals with First Amendment issues, Jen Lawrence, Vice President of the America First Project, Patrick Howley, Editor-in-Chief of BigLeaguePolitics.com, and joining us by Skype is Al Tompkins, Senior Faculty Member at the Poynter Institute. Now, I actually want to start with you because you really have your finger on the pulse of all of this, and describe to me how concerned you are about not only the media's relationship with the new president, but the impact it's having on our readers and our viewers and what we are to believe.
Well, it's difficult for people who don't want to believe that the person that they are following is not exactly telling them the truth. That's hard for people to believe. It was hard for Obama followers to believe, and it's hard for Trump followers to believe, and Reagan followers, and so on and so on. There's nothing new about that. What's different is that in this case, we have a president who appears to go in front of the public with whatever is top of mind without thoroughly thinking it out. And his associates are taking the cue from him and doing pretty much the same thing, like talking about massacres that did not occur. So what happens also is that he is a master at creating phrases that he repeats over and over, and they sort of take over the whole conversation. So when he talks about fake news, he's mostly talking about things that he wishes weren't reported the way they're reported. It doesn't mean that they're actually wrong. It just means he doesn't like it. He says that journalists aren't covering terrorism. It's just not true. He says that murders are up in the United States. It's just not true.
Well, and now let me jump in there right now and get Jen to respond to that, because I mean the whole thing about the murder rate in the U.S., that was just a couple of days ago. Factually, it wasn't true. You could argue about whether the president misspoke or not, but and I know both of you come from Breitbart, which comes from a certain perspective. We could get into that sometime, but when the president says something demonstrably false, whether it's about the murder rate or issues involving how many people voted illegally in the election, what do reporters like you think?
I mean, I think that it's a sign of what's going on in this country. And I think that there are major news outlets such as CNN, MSNBC, who have literally reported fake stories. They have put fake stories out there that people have believed over and over and over and again.
Let me just challenge you on one thing. It's one thing to make a mistake in a story. For instance, there was an issue about whether President Trump removed Martin Luther King's bust from the Oval Office. That was an error. There's a difference between that and a deliberate misreporting.
Yes, absolutely, and I can speak to a deliberate misreporting. I was at the 9/11 memorial on September 11th when Hillary Clinton had her medical episode, and Breitbart and Fox News were the only two outlets reporting, while I personally watched for 2 hours. The mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN, AP, all got together for 2 hours in the press pin and refused to report the story that Hillary Clinton had a health episode. They held the story for 2 hours until they could verify their sources, until they got in a little group and they decided what that story was going to be. So that's where I think the problem is in this country. It's with the mainstream media, and when they can clean up their act, well, then let's start reporting the truth.
Al, I want to get a brief response, since you are the deacon of journalism. I mean, does Jen have a point there?
No.
Okay, that's a brief response.
I mean, come on, 2 hours? I was just going to take a quick look online to see if I could get their first mention. So that's not my memory of it, but rather than guess, I'm going to actually look and see if I can find the
I really
first,
would challenge you to, actually, because I was standing there. So
right.
I was firsthand, I was there. So if you want to challenge me about what I personally saw with my own eyes, yeah, where were these people?
I really don't care what you saw. What I care about.
Well, that's fine.
You don't care about a presidential candidate collapsing?
We're going to get back to that in a moment, but I wanted to bring Andrea in here because you defend the First Amendment and you are very involved with a lot of civil liberties issues all across Florida. Do you see a problem when you have two sides who are seeing the same scene differently in terms of the public confidence, in terms of what is actually happening?
Well, really honestly, almost any scene will be viewed differently by different people. That's just a reality. But when it comes to journalism, what's important and what's coming out, even in this discussion, is fact-checking. Not all journalistic outlets are required to cover events that I think are important or someone else thinks are important or the right thinks is important or the left thinks is important. What is important is when stories are covered, that they're covered independently and that they're fact-checked and that they're accurate. And that's where we're running into a problem. And it's somewhat a direct consequence of us having access to less responsible journalistic sources on the internet. Anyone can put up a website, call themselves, a particular publication and put things out there. And while that's First Amendment protected, as a citizen, you should educate yourself about what it is you're viewing.
We only have about 30 seconds left in this segment. You say it's democracy, but shouldn't anybody who's putting stuff out there check their facts?
Yes, but who gets to be the arbiter of that? I mean, the democratization of media on the internet is a fantastic thing, and Matt Drudge and the late Andrew Breitbart deserve a lot of credit for starting this movement, a resistance movement against the mainstream media that for more than 15, 20 years has been fudging things and lying and committing very big errors. And Trump, as a response, had to campaign against the media because the media was acting as the arm of the Hillary Clinton campaign.
All right, let's just take a pause, and we are only obviously just getting started on our discussion of fake news. Coming up, we'll have more right after our check with the weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the relationship between the White House and the press and the impact of fake news on the media landscape. Our guests tonight are civil rights attorney Andrea Mogensen, Jen Lawrence with the America First Project, Patrick Howley of BigLeaguePolitics.com, and joining us by Skype is Al Tompkins of the Poynter Institute in St. Pete. And Al, I want to start with you, and if you could respond to something that Patrick was talking about. Who is the arbiter of truth? We have PolitiFact, which basically fact checks all the candidates during the campaign, but it seems that the public in general kind of ignores it.
Well, I don't know if they ignore it or not. Let me come back to the challenge of one of your guests there, who I think said that there was, what did they say, a 2-hour delay in reporting that collapse video?
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, it was, the first video was posted on YouTube at 9:32 Eastern Time, 9:37. Rick Leventhal from Fox News reported it. Then, not very long after that, at 10:04, that was posted. Let's see if I can get it in front of the camera.
I'm sorry, I can't read it. Can you read it for me?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Hillary
And who's it by?
I'm at a memorial 30 minutes ago. Campaign aides won't comment on where she is now.
Okay, so they won't report.
By Grant Jaffe, another producer.
So they're relying on the Clinton campaign.
Yeah, they're again going to the Clinton campaign. They're not reporting what's happening on the ground.
Let's
I was there.
But you know, the fact is, Jen, you know, I've covered lots of stories and driven home and heard other reporters report on the story that I've been to, and things are not always what I witnessed, but I have never really delivered an attitude in terms of why another reporter sees something differently or maybe at a different time. But let's just continue on with some of the points that we've been trying to make, because Sebastian Gorka is one of the President Trump's aides right now, and he said just the other day that the media has an attitude, which you could debate whether or not that's true, but because of that, the White House is continue to use the term fake news. So what is the public to believe when demonstrably there is an issue about the murder rate or whether there's evidence of massive voter fraud? that cannot be proven, and the White House labels it fake news when the facts would say differently.
Well, you know, President Trump is not referring to the entire press corps. He's referring to some establishment outlets like the Washington Post, which is now owned by one billionaire named Jeff Bezos. And I challenge my friend at the Poynter Institute to tell me it's a good idea for one billionaire with his own financial interests to control the most prestigious, supposedly, newspaper in America. But, you know, what we're seeing right now is the democratization of the White House press corps as well. We have the Daily Mail in there. We have the Daily Caller in there. We have Breitbart in there. We have people who are plugged into populists on the internet who are now finally able to ask a question in the White House press conference. That was never the case, you know, for decades when it was only a chosen few who were allowed to go in.
Andrea, I want to ask you a question because, number one, I think a lot of people have said that there are more media outlets able to ask questions at the White House press briefing. They've opened up a Skype seat, and they're allowing local media organizations to ask those questions, and that's probably a good thing, I would think you would believe.
I would say so.
Let me ask you this, though. During the campaign, the president often talked about changing the libel laws. Do you think that was just campaign rhetoric responding to a lot of negative press, or do you think that that there would be any appetite in the Congress to do something like that?
Well, I'm not sure that that would be a strategy that would actually be helpful or effective to the Trump administration anyway, but it does seem to be one of the efforts. When this administration doesn't like something, they usually threaten pushback. They usually threaten some type of negative impact on whoever their detractors appear to be, and basically that's his typical attitude. I'll sue the pants off you if you say something bad about me.
Is it fair to say that in the early days of the Obama administration, the same thing happened? They questioned about whether Fox News should have a seat in the White House briefing room, and it was a long time before the president went on Fox News to do an interview?
I think that's true, and I think all administrations have detractors. I mean, that's part of we have primarily a two-party system, and half the people don't get their way every single time, so there's always going to be detractors. And it's not my perception that the media is controlled by one party or another. It depends on what you're talking about when you're talking about the media.
Al, let me ask you this. You know, Patrick brought up the fact that the Washington Post is owned by a billionaire. It is true that the media has gone under an incredible consolidation, which actually began in the Reagan administration, by the way. Do you see it is a problem that some of the largest news organizations and media companies are owned by a smaller amount of people?
Well, I understand the concern, and I've worked for small organizations and big ones, and I have to say that some of the bigger organizations I've worked for have been some of the better organizations, although I've worked for some small family-owned groups like you who are pretty responsible citizens. So it depends more on what the owner wants to do with it than anything else. What I would say is this. We're not in the same era that we were pre-Reagan, for example, when there was so few that you could choose from for truth. You can choose Breitbart if you want to, or you can choose Fox News if you want to, or you can choose CNN if you want to, or any one of a gazillion other websites and sources. You can graze along and get whatever you want from whomever you want. That's true. So you can decide now. So I'm a lot less concerned about the power structure of ownership than I would have been if this were the 70s, when there were very few outlets that you could rely on every day. There were radio that largely not corporately owned. Now there are. And there was no internet. Cable was just beginning. But they said the same thing about CNN and Turner.
And I do believe, if you remember, the Vice President Spiro Agnew calling the, what was it, the negative nabobs of negativism. So it's always been out there. But now we have a president who tweets, any negative polls are fake news. And I'm wondering what your take about that is, because there are good polls, there are bad polls, but
absolutely,
if it's bad news, doesn't mean it's fake.
Well, I think that we're missing the whole point here. Where did fake news come from? And the media has done this to themselves. You have anchors like Brian Williams, who outwardly outwardly lied, got caught for it.
And it cost him great.
But now he got hired at MSNBC. So what does that have to say about MSNBC when you hire a known liar to report the news? Okay. So if we're gonna talk about fake media, let's talk about fake media. Until President Trump brought this up and exposed what the media was doing.
Just for a moment, is all bad news by definition fake news?
No. No, but we're referring to a few mainstream establishment outlets that are very powerful. For instance, in Cleveland, I caught a CNN Insta poll showing that 70% of the CNN audience appreciated and liked and enjoyed President Trump's speech. I reported that, and immediately CNN pulled it down off of the screen and actually ran an article on CNN.com saying that CNN Insta polls are not reliable. So I got them to admit that their own polling system is inaccurate, and they had to do it, even though they knew that the Insta poll was right. They knew that their polling was right because they had to do it because they had an agenda.
Andrea, let me ask you, what are our viewers supposed to make out of this conversation tonight? Because although the media viewership is more dispersed than ever before, people still tune in to watch this and read the local paper, and they are more unsure than ever of what to believe.
And they should be. I think that you have to ask yourself, as a citizen, as an individual, what am I getting my news for? If I'm trying to get my news to get the truth, then you should go to more than one source. If you're trying to get the news for it to be entertained, then pick one of the media sources that you know is consistent with your beliefs. There are some media sources that are far to the right, some that are far to the left, and it's all in the middle.
All right. That's a good place to take a quick break. When we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about President Trump's economic policies when we come back. Welcome back. Is fake news a reality we need to get used to? What can the press do to better serve the public when even the White House is releasing false information sometimes? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Al, how concerned are you about where we are right now with the president tweeting, accusing whether it's CBS, CNN, or whatever of fake news, and the media constantly, almost every day, saying the president is simply not telling the truth?
Well, I trust the public to be able to figure out what's true and what's not true. If you don't trust the public to do that, then we might as well get rid of the whole election system and not have juries. We're just going to need a benevolent king to lead us. I do believe that people have enough common sense to sort through it. I do get worried, though, when, like at the beginning of this program, you had a gentleman who said that Obama got a free ride. He just didn't. It's just not the way it was. In 2013, PolitiFact, for example, called Obama the lie of the year. It was, remember, you could keep your provider. And then in 2015, PolitiFact called Trump's lies the lies of the year. It's not true he got a free ride. It may seem like that to people who didn't like him, just as it will seem like to Trump supporters that he's getting attacked too often.
And Andrea, let me go to
long book.
All right. We're running out of time, so I wanted to get everybody in here. Andrea, I mean, we live in Sarasota. A lot of people do believe that President Obama got a free ride. There are also, you know, a lot of people who came out in the days after the inauguration to, you know, take issue with President Trump.
There is no one who takes public office that is not going to suffer criticism. That's just the way it is. That's one of the beautiful things about the United States. We have a First Amendment right to challenge. We have a First Amendment right to transparency, to know and to express our opinions. There's going to be criticism, and saying criticism, you know, is fake. That's really just political. It has nothing to do with anything. It's because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not true. What's important is that we get our news from a variety of sources, and that we pay attention to what's true as citizens.
Jen, does it do anybody good if there is an increasingly toxic relationship between the president, the press, and the public?
Well, I think that's on the press, right? If they start reporting the story, how the story is supposed to report it, and they're out there and they're getting the story and they're reporting it cleanly, yes, then there is no need for that. But right now, you have mainstream media outlets, you have everybody else who has attacked Trump since day one, reporting fake stories on him, lying about him and everything else, and it took him standing up for the American people to say, wait a second, the media is doing you a disservice. So it's up to the American people to go out and research their own, and it's up to journalists to have journalistic integrity.
And Patrick gets the last word, but I'll ask the question this way. When the president says something that simply is demonstrably not true, does not, whether it's CBS, CNN, the Washington Post, or ABC7, have the responsibility to point that out?
I believe that of every politician, but I also believe that of the press. And when the Tea Party started, I read an article in the Washington Post that disgusted me, in which they were comparing elderly people who just wanted their health care plans back with George Wallace, and saying that the Tea Party was racist. And that narrative continued for years. And so I devoted my adult life to fighting against this. And the great honor of my life was working for Breitbart during a period where we got the traffic up to 35 million unique visitors, and we changed the face of news. And so this is a revolution that we want you to be a part of and continue going to alternative news sites.
All right, and there is more to come. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, the economy under President Trump. Since taking office, the president has signed a series of executive orders to remove the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, deregulate industry, as well as Wall Street. He is also threatening tariffs against some of our closest trading partners like Mexico and China. And we asked you what you thought about those policies. Chris Cole writes, the TPP did not benefit the U.S. at all. We need a strong middle class, and jobs will improve the middle class. Robert Thiel writes, I feel in the short term they will improve the economy, but in the long term, especially if he imposes tariffs on foreign trade, it will hurt us. Pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership will let China take over as the dominant world trading partner instead of us, which will damage us. And Keith Thoreau writes, could, that's all I'm hearing. Look, nothing has worked in our favor to this point. Let's try Trump's plan. Well, what do you think of President Trump's relationship with the press and fake news? Let us know by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to watch past Roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Andrea Mogensen is an attorney who handles cases involving the First Amendment. Jen Lawrence is a former writer for Breitbart News, and Patrick Howley is the editor-in-chief of BigLeaguePolitics.com, and Al Tompkins is a senior faculty member at the Poynter Institute. He joined us by Skype.